Welcome back to the SF Giants Bayside podcast. I think I got the order wrong, but you know what it is. I'm Marc Delucchi. That's Kerry Crowley. Kerry, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. An interesting week of baseball and an interesting time for the Giants organization. A month out from the trade deadline. We have a lot to talk about today, Mark.
The beauty of doing a weekly podcast is sometimes you say something and you feel like, oof, you have to live with that for this week. This week I feel pretty good because I think last week was kind of the low point, and it was sort of you saw the inflection point, right? Like, yes, there is a world where this all falls apart for the Giants, and this is like a collapse coming. But again, the Giants have been for a long time now a 500 team, and 500 teams look like elite teams sometimes, look like bad teams, some look like the worst team in baseball sometimes, and it averages out, right? Like the Giants have been a very high variance mid mediocre team over the last 2.5 years, and so far that continues to be the case this year because again, after falling 6 games below 500 when last we were talking last week, they take 3 out of 4 from the Cubs. They take 2 out of 3 from the Dodgers. And again, they're still 3 games below 500. They aren't, no one's putting the Giants at the top of any power rankings. But it was a good week of baseball against, despite the Cubs' flaws, a solid baseball team in Chicago. And obviously the Dodgers, who are, the team to beat, right? Like in at least the National League West, and obviously one of the most formidable championship contenders. So, yeah, it's a good week of baseball, right? And we haven't gotten to say that a lot recently.
Yeah, exactly. I think we've said it a lot more this year after home games for the Giants and
Mm.
after home weeks for the Giants because this has just been a team that's been miserable on the road this season. They really would be significantly better if they could just, break even on the road right now. But they are so far under 500 on the road that it's really been to their detriment. And then I think that what the Giants can point to as an organization, though, is looking at the way that they played the Dodgers and understanding that they're going to have a lot of pitchers coming back, understanding that, hey, you want to see what this team looks like with Blake Snell and Robbie Ray. And, I may not have a whole lot of confidence in what the Giants' rotation can be in July and August. I don't know that I'm buying Robbie Ray coming off of Tommy John surgery and being great, or Blake Snell ever really living up to his full potential this season. But I don't think they're going to throw in the towel and say all of a sudden that we're a seller at the trade deadline without seeing what their rotation looks like. And I don't think they'll have the opportunity to see what a full strength rotation would look like until about, August 15th or
Until
so.
the
So
last week of the season.
exactly. It puts them in this incredibly difficult position to be in. But if you're Farhan Zaidi, it actually puts you in kind of a good position from a
Mm.
personal standpoint because he can just say, "Hey, look, let's wait until the team that I built is actually together
Yeah.
and then evaluate things." And I think that you go from there.
Yeah, no, and I don't mean to derail this podcast because this is a Giants podcast, but Klay Thompson plans to join the Dallas Mavericks on a 3-year, $50 million deal. Anyway, and is signed in trade saying Josh Green to Charlotte. Sorry. Anyway, Warriors brain is activated. No, I mean, and you mentioned the rotation. Hayden Birdsong makes his debut this week, and I think, like showcase the stuff he has, right, that gives him some really intriguing long-term potential. The command and working deep into games is going to be something that I think is going to be a challenges is one way to put it, but that's the task in his development, right? And that's where I think Birdsong has been effective enough in the minors, right? I wouldn't say this is like a rush promotion. The Giants needed starting pitching; they needed innings anyway. And again, Spencer Howard, who they just designated for assignment, right, with Dalton Jeffries early in the season. I'm not opposed to Birdsong getting an opportunity with these innings, especially since Mason Black, despite some recent quality starts, has been kind of scuffling a bit down at AAA. Kai Wei Tang obviously is at a really rough, what's looking kind of like a lost season in the upper minors as well. And, alongside the high octane stuff, it seems like Kyle Harrison's slated to get back into the rotation this week. And so, as we're getting into this, like you mentioned, we're obviously recording this on the 1st of July. We're getting towards the trade deadline. Yeah, I know John Shea and Susan Slusser kind of did the point counterpoint over at the Chronicle on like whether the Giants should be sellers and buyers. And I just can't see a scenario where the Giants should be sellers, in part because again, you're not going to get the problem with selling is unless you have a piece that is so impactful, right? That the odds are you're going to get at best a role player, right? And the Giants, unless that role player isn't a league average shortstop, then that is probably not going to be something that really moves the needle for me with the Giants. Like, obviously, look, I love prospects, and I'm not saying prospects are ultimately kind of lottery tickets in a way. So yeah, you get more of those into the system, but with the cap on minor league talent, you're not. there is, I think, less of value to doing the sort of old school approach of, hey, let's just trade everyone we can for every player to be named later, every lower level prospect, because now you're going to have to cut the 160th, 159th, 158th player in your organization, which is different than the 230th. And, like in these calculations. And again, the Giants don't have a piece that I think you're going to get a impact piece I feel good about, right? Like the one piece I've said for a while, right, would have been Camilo Doval, and again,
Exactly.
and he still, I think, what by the way, would potentially be in that place. And again, given the state of the bullpen, you might be hesitant. At the same time, hey, if someone is willing to say no, I believe we can get the Camilo 2 years ago and give you that kind of value, you got to think about it, you know. But look, if Baltimore calls you about Ryan Walker, right, like that's where things, I think, like there are some places where you can maybe get some tension points, but you know a team, Baltimore is not going to, I think, dangle Jackson Holiday at this deadline for a piece the Giants have, right? And if that's the one, I would say that's one piece that could make me think about pretty much trading a lot from the Giants side, even if it's sacrificing 2024 contention, because of the questions about the Giants long term at shortstop, because obviously Holiday was, and to some still is, a top 10 top 5 prospect in baseball, but obviously has had this very slow start, right? Rough start, and kind of seems like a kind of slight derailment this season. If Baltimore is kind of ready to jump ship to a certain extent, then hey, maybe I'm willing to talk on some things, but that's not going to happen. Like there's a reason. The reason I'd be willing to do that is the exact reason Baltimore is not going to, right?
Yeah, exactly. I really do think the Giants are 1 year away from the point where some of these players that they have who would be tradable, who would bring back great returns, are would be in a situation where if they were a bad baseball team next year, then you would say, hey, maybe we do have to look long and hard at Camilo Doval. Maybe with
Mm-hmm.
Logan Webb halfway through this contract and already throwing 200 plus innings in each of those seasons, maybe we do have to start from scratch. I really could see a scenario where if the Giants miss the playoffs this year, if there's a changeover in the front office, or if next year they come out of the gates and they're just terrible, then you have to
That's
take a
this.
good long hard look. But this year isn't that time for me. And
Yeah.
look, I think that Logan Webb's the player you build around. I think Camilo Doval is someone you keep for the ninth inning because he has the electric stuff. And even if it has been an up and down season, you want him. I just don't think they're quite ready for that. But if the bottom falls out this year and they get off to a terrible start next year, they're going to be having very different conversations, and they're going to be the types of conversations that no Giants fan wants any part of, because those two players are really well liked by this fan base.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest fear. And that's why I've been hesitant and remain hesitant to sort of jump onto a like Zaidi has to go bandwagon, in part because I remember that the other candidates, the other people who were reportedly above Zaidi in the Giants targeting was Mike Elias, who went to Baltimore and yes, has built something great in Baltimore, but that came at some really ugly lean years. And then the other was Heim Bloom, who went to the Red Sox and traded Mookie Betts, right? Like the I think you're right. If there is a front office change, the one thing I will give Farhan Zaidi a lot of credit for is he never took sort of the easy way out on a reset. And I give him credit for that. Now, again, that's where you expect more winning than the Giants have gotten. But no, I very much agree with you. Man, rebuilds usually don't work out. Look at the White Sox. They traded Chris Sale, they traded Jose Quintana, they traded Adam Eaton, all those guys. They got a ton of prospects, and the White Sox are in a worse place now than when they traded those guys. And frankly, they'd probably be better. They'd have been better for a lot more years if they'd kept that core and tried to build around it. But no, you're right. Like that's how this works, right? That's also, it's just the nature of the politics of it, right? Zaidi probably doesn't have the cachet and leverage to try a sort of full teardown in the way that a newer person coming in might be able to sort of force the hand or pressure ownership, or at least have the leverage to do that. But this is where I guess the question that I throw to you is, do you think the Giants should buy? Because I'm pretty aggressively in the camp that they should be pursuing some upgrades and willing to part with a good amount of prospect capital to do it. How do you feel about that proposition, given the Giants are below 500, not a title contender?
I think that I'm on an annual basis on the record every year is saying buy, buy, buy. I just think like that is my mentality as a big market team, that I think there's no excuse in the expanded playoff era to sit back and just let your roster stand pat like they did
Yeah.
last year with the AJ Pollock deal. I mean, that is worse than not, that's worse than like selling at that
Yeah.
point. That type of an addition where you're adding someone who had no track record of
Yeah.
success in the 2023 season, it just makes no sense to me. And yet, every single year, I think that there are so many teams that do what the Giants did, that are in the middle and they just say, hey, we're going to keep our guys together. And that's the messaging that they put out from the organization. And I think it's just the wrong message and the wrong way to attack Major League Baseball. I think that there are so many teams and front offices that are scared of being bold and scared of making a big move.
Yep.
And the reality is, like, it is so rare for someone to be a president of baseball operations for more than 5 seasons.
Yep.
Like you are in that job for a very short period of time. Why would you not be bold? Because chances are you're going to get fired anyway. And so, like, that's just the way the league works. So why not do everything in your power, or, use every resource available to you to try to win the World Series? You don't need to think about the San Francisco Giants in 2030 if you're Farhan Zaidi, because you're not going to be here in 2030
Yeah.
unless you made incredibly bold and successful moves, because mediocrity is, after 5, 6 years, not tolerated in this game. It's not quite the same situation for executives that it is for hitting coaches and pitching coaches who are cycled out every 18 months or so on an annual basis. But I do think, like, there is such a case to be made for executives to be as bold as possible in the short times that they hold these jobs. And I think with a team with the pockets as deep as the San Francisco Giants and an executive like Farhan, who, he's been here for 4 or 5 years without that big signature move on his resume,
Yeah.
it's time that they take those swings. And so I'm always advocating for that. And I don't know that anything will change my mind to stop the advocating for that kind of mentality.
Yeah, I mean, the tricky thing will be, right, who is that piece that becomes available, right? Like shortstop again could be that, although maybe Wisely's emergent gets you trustworthy. I mean, ironically, I think the shortstop who's probably played the best, it would be the best fit is Paul DeYoung, but for I think, but again for
Forever
reasons,
Giant.
yeah, right. Like I mean, but again, he's striking out a lot. He's hitting an occasional homer. He plays good defense at short. He's just, I think an upgrade over Nick Ahmed, but would the Giants want to deal with that again, given how things went last year? I don't know. And again, that's not moving the needle in a major way, right? Like you would look for something else. When it comes to like potential big name hunting or big game hunting here, are there any names that come to you? Are there any that you're drawn to?
I think that's really hard for me. I haven't sat down and thought, like, this player would be great, like
Okay.
Luis Robert, Eloy Jimenez. I
Hmm.
just, like, I don't think I've sat down and thought realistically long and hard about who that
Yep.
player could be. The idea that I've had in my mind for a while is Pete Alonso and moving Lamont Wade Jr. to left
To left
field
field.
and
Yeah.
trying to get Michael Conforto off the books and just eating part of that contract, if you trade him away. And
Hmm.
so, you've still got your platoon in right field with Slater and Yastrzemski. You can put Matos out there if one of them gets hurt. One of
Yeah.
them seemingly is
Or
hurt a lot of
potentially
the
sort of a hybrid platoon with Wade between left field and DH with Soler
Exactly.
potentially on
Yeah.
occasion.
Because
Yeah.
that's another thing. Like, keeping Lamont Wade fresh is
Yeah.
very important for this team. And his
Yep.
knee it's going the way of
Yeah.
Brandon Belt's knee.
Yeah.
Like it just, I know that he's been out with the hamstring issue, and I know that the knee hasn't necessarily been the same kind of a problem for him this season as it has in recent years. But Lamont is so valuable as a leadoff hitter,
Yeah.
so valuable at the top of the order, in taking pitches, working at bats, setting the tone for a lineup, that I think you do everything you can to keep him in there. And if there's a way to use him as a hybrid DH, left fielder, first baseman, I think that is the way that the Giants should be looking at him, because he can be valuable for a long time. But if he's not picking up a glove and playing some first base for you, you have to think really creatively about keeping him fresh. And I still think that, Alonso's the one guy who would be a big addition to the lineup, who in theory is gettable. But I
Hmm.
say gettable, and the Mets are ahead of the Giants in the standings right
Yeah.
now. So it's so funny to see the way that the National League race has unfolded. How do you look at it?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to throw some questions at you because otherwise I'll just ramble. What piece is off limits for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to you?
Logan Webb,
Yeah.
Elliot
Okay.
Ramos,
Yeah.
Patrick Bailey.
Hmm.
I think those guys. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to Doval in the right move if you got someone
Hmm.
back who could help you, or if you just committed today and said, Ryan Walker is going to pitch the ninth, Jordan Hicks is going to pitch the seventh after
Yep.
the All-Star
We
break, and
still have
Tyler
Tyler
Rogers is
Rogers.
the
Yeah.
eighth. I mean, that they really could do that, but it's a huge risk, because anytime you subtract from the bullpen and then subtract from, a position of strength where Doval has that ninth inning experience, I hate that idea. But I really wouldn't say he's truly off limits. However, Toronto wouldn't want a closer in a rebuild. Like that just like Toronto's not rebuilding and thinking, well, if we get Camilo Doval, all of a sudden we're going to be better.
Yeah.
So they're looking
Well,
at
but right, like you can't. I mean, it's the create like. But maybe you
yeah,
move Doval to Baltimore and it's a 3-team and prospects you get back from
yeah,
Baltimore. To be fair,
exactly.
right? Like there are ways in which you can kind of do an addition subtraction thing. I do think though, like you end up again. This is like get back to the A's, the John Lester Cespedes deal, which is you want. I mean, it's not ideal because if you're trying to win, making your team worse in one way to get better, it might still be a net positive. But ideally, you could avoid it. But the Giants might need the pieces, right? They might need to get some more stuff in there. Um, what about Kyle Harrison?
Yeah, I don't think I move Harrison just because, and I
It's only
actually
one
have
more year after this with Guerrero as well and his limitations
yeah, I've
defensively for
got
sure.
some interesting thoughts on Harris. Well, I think they're interesting on Harrison. It's up to the audience to decide that. But I think he should become a sinker slider guy. And I think that he should do exactly what Logan Webb did after 2019 and 2020, reshape his arsenal and come back to spring training next year as a different pitcher. I think that the sinker in particular with his left-handed arm slot has the potential to be such a great pitch for him. He got through the minor leagues on the four seam riding high. I don't think it has the same zip as it once did. I think that the way that he throws lends itself more to sinker slider. And he never had a great feel for a breaking ball in the minor leagues. I don't love the curveball. I think that he can be a ground ball king with the slider, with the sinker. And I hope that he makes that adjustment this offseason because the one thing that I know about Kyle Harrison is he understands how to pitch. And he
Yep.
understands how to pitch at a really high level for someone his age. And so I don't want him to run into this ceiling with the four seam curveball combination where, he's so reliant on the four seam that he ends up giving up 25, 30 home runs a year because he has to throw that pitch when he gets leveraged into 3-1 situations and he can't rely on the curveball. And so that's my, aside on
No,
Kyle Harris.
I mean, it's an interesting take, and again, his four seamer has not been the dominant pitch this year, right? In the way it was in the minors, in the way it was in his short stint in the majors last year, right? We've seen hitters be able to square it up with a bit more consistently. It's not getting the whiffs at the same rate. I mean, I'm definitely open to that. I mean, right, the thing for me is what will get him to throw strikes more. Like, what is the pitch that he can throw strikes more consistently, right? It's like, Roger Munter and I have both been that we've loved his changeup for a long time. And this year he's actually throwing his changeup more than any of his
Yeah.
non-fastball pitches, right? But the reason he didn't throw the changeup is because he couldn't find the strike zone with it. And, the breaking balls similarly, whether it's been the harder slider, the slower curveball, he's played around with it. And he's all of his pitches are nasty in a vacuum, and it's just, but how do you make hitters respect it, right? It's going to be at the big league level. It's going to be, you need to be able to throw these for strikes. You need to be able to put them in defensive positions. They're in a 1-2 count. They're in an 0-2 count. They're in an 0-1 count, right? Like they're afraid of that first pitch strike from you, right? That's Logan Webb's, right? Like, despite all his amazing pitches, which he has an incredible arsenal, it is also the fact that he is constantly putting hitters on the back foot, and that hitters from the first pitch are expecting a strike. So,
Yep.
it also means there's going to be, if you're a pitcher who struggles with command, guys are more likely to just take on the first pitch because they're not worried about falling behind in the count because they know they can get back into it, which means, a 5 pitch at bat that could have been a 1 pitch at bat, right? Like that plays a role in being able to work deeper into games. It plays a role in hitters seeing fewer pitches from you the first time through the order. So the second and third time, you have more of an advantage or less of a disadvantage than you would otherwise. So, I mean, look, if the sinker slider is able to get him in the zone more with that breaking ball, I do think the four seamers characteristics, I think the four seamer, it's not going to be the dominant pitch it was in the minors. I do think with more consistent secondary pitches, I think we would see that return. I think it has the characteristics there, but also look, play with grips. I mean, maybe he has to learn to have live with a fastball dominant arsenal. And maybe that means he's playing with grips on the fastball. It's a four seamer, a sinker, and a cutter, right? That he's, and rather than throwing the four seamer 60% like he's doing this year, maybe it's the four seamer 40 and it's the sinker 20, right?
I love that.
Like that could be a way, right, in which if developing that breaking ball, that off-speed pitch that finds the zone consistently is just something that he's not able to do, then playing with fastball grip might be an easier way to do it since he is more consistently able to find the zone in that way.
Yeah, and I think that that's going to be the big challenge for him because he's still just, 23 years old at the time that he'll be making these perceived adjustments. And who knows if the Giants even want that to happen next year. I just see it as a way to take his game to the next level because I think that if he's pitching this well as a 22-year-old rookie, understanding where Logan Webb was at the same point in his development, Webb was terrible on a major league
Yeah.
mound at that point. The ERA was 5.4 and then 6, but you saw glimpses. And I just think like Kyle Harrison is someone who the Giants ought to be thinking about maximizing his potential at every turn. And that gets back to the original point of that's why I don't trade him because I
Yeah.
think that the ceiling is even so much higher than he's already shown as a 22-year-old.
Yeah, I think really the only person who seems like a potential trade candidate at this moment, I guess, would be like it's Bo Bichette and Luis Robert are kind of the only two names that could hit the market that would make me cut off. Because that's where the reason I asked you about Vlad is he's kind of that cutoff for me too. Because to me, it's like partially just the team control, the defensive value, positional viability of Robert and Bichette are in a league of their own to me,
Yeah.
above the Guerrero, even like Jazz Chisholm, and then the rentals like Bregman and Alonso. Like I'm definitely not willing to
Yeah.
give up Harrison for those guys just because of the nature of how long you have them. But again, if you could, again, I don't see the Blue Jays trading Bichette, but if he's on the table, and similarly with the White Sox and Robert, we've been doing this dance for a while, but like those are guys that I think would make me think about it just because of the impact they bring to the lineup, because of the long-term team control with those players have, and the fact that again, if I'm looking at 2024, maybe I could, I may not. I'm giving up future production with Kyle Harrison, but I could potentially trade for a Tyler Anderson or someone else who might be able to fill innings in a similar way if I feel like that's what I need to do down the stretch to
Yeah.
triangulate for the 2024 team.
Yeah, Tyler Anderson, another forever Giant. I mean, bring back Kevin Pillar at this point too, after his walk off the other night for the Angels. So that's an interesting name. Tyler Anderson could fetch the Angels something at the trade deadline this
Yeah,
year.
and it's just it depends on how the Giants view the innings down the stretch, right? Because it's no secret that the Giants bullpen has been taxed beyond oblivion. Shout out to Spencer Bivens, who's probably the hero of the week, going 5 innings, a career high at any professional level. 5 innings, 1 run ball against the Dodgers, ends up getting the win. Uh, One of the best stories in the system,
Yeah.
period. A guy who they signed out of indie ball was a sort of off the like offhand got some big league spring training invite this year because he had a good minor league season, and then was just really impressing the coaches. And then this week, like, just comes in and he's been serving in a swingman long reliever role, gets a start, goes 5 full innings. Yeah, shout out to Spencer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Spencer's story is incredible. It's why a 162 game season is worth tuning into.
Mm-hmm.
Spencer's win on Sunday validates the diehard core Giants fans experience. I really think that those are the stories that you live for over a 162 game season. And, just by nature of the sport, you're going to have a lot more casuals watching if you get to the playoffs. And you need that. You need bandwagon fans to sell out the ballpark, to drive up revenue on an annual basis, to come and show up when the team is good. That's critical for a franchise's bottom line. But when you're kind of in the middle and you've had a few bad years and you're still someone who's diehard in it, watching every game, hoping for the best for the Giants, it's a story like Spencer Bivens that makes it all worth it because he is, I think, maybe the easiest guy to root for that I've ever seen in a Giants uniform. There's been a lot of good guys who've come through the organization. My 10 years of really covering this team closely.
Yeah. And, as we look ahead to the Giants trying to build on this strong week of baseball, you mentioned, right, it starts with getting better on the road. And that's this week, right? They have a 3-game series in Atlanta against, after the Dodgers, you're getting the top 2 teams of the National League, basically. Then you're getting a 3-game series in Cleveland against the Guardians. So, it's going to be a formidable test for the Giants. Seems like Kyle Harrison's going to be back in the rotation. Blake Snell not back yet, going to make at least one more rehab start at AAA. But again, you're getting closer to him being, back in the mix. Robbie Ray still rehabbing and pitching and being effective in the lower minors at this point, although
Yeah.
obviously his ramp up is going to be slower. So again, I'm hesitant to say there's reason for excitement in a big way for the Giants, right? Like ultimately, they're still 3 games below 500. They still haven't been able to sort of live up to expectations on a grander scale. But again, this this past week makes me feel more comfortable saying they've at least averted doom for a little longer, right? They are again still treading water, and the question is whether the rotation and other things can lock in down the stretch to get them to that next place, and they're still doing that. And you're also getting exciting emerging performances from Elliot Ramos, from Patrick Bailey, from Brett Wisely. Even though all three have regressed a bit from sort of their excellent starts to the season, they're not drowning, right? They look like they belong. They're putting up big at bats. That's three position players who, if I said last April that, like that are looking like legit everyday long-term pieces, people would be very surprised by that. And
Yeah,
so,
no one would have believed that.
yeah, and I'm excited to get another Hayden Birdsong starter too. If we get Kyle Harrison back in the mix, like again, this isn't quite the exciting young team that I think it's, we aren't quite on the, like, we're sure we're building something great here. That's still, I think, up for debate. But there are definitely the pieces that you can see falling into place. There's the picture is starting to become clear. This is not a lineup of everyone 29 to 35 years old in the way it was at points last season when things were mediocre.
Yeah, very well said. And I think that the prospect of these guys becoming core players is exciting. And that's another reason that the journey of 162 is worth it because, March 11th, Elliot Ramos optioned back to AAA in spring training. No one thought that he had a chance to make major contributions to the roster this year based on the Giants' vision for what this team was going to be. And now he's as fun as any player to watch on a
There's the
daily basis.
future.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been saying it.
That's true. And that is this week's episode of the Bayside SF Giants podcast. That's Kerry Crowley. I'm Marc Delucchi. We've been leading the Elliot Ramos fan club for 3 years now and counting. And this has been go give us a like, give us a subscription over on YouTube, Bayside Baseball. And yeah, thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. See you.